Good evening, everyone. For those of you who joined early,
Hello.
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 I'm on a new device, so I'm trying to like people can hear me.
we can hear you.
Okay.
Good evening, Tom. Welcome.
Hey Dan. Hey everybody.
Hey, Tom.
We'll get started here in just a moment once we get a quorum.
Is everyone else banging on the door at City Hall?
Sorry.
So we need to have 6 members to have a quorum of 10. We've got 4. Tom, as much as I'd love you to count for this purpose, you don't.
I don't. No.
We just need one more.
Welcome. No, Bob doesn't count either. Unfortunately, he doesn't count towards quorum. He counts for lots of things, just not a quorum. And anyone want to volunteer to be the note taker and record minutes for this evening?
I can be one of them. I know we've had more than one.
Alex, you're it. Hello, Bob. We can see you in the shadows. We'll get started as soon as we have a quorum, which requires we have one more member join. Yay. And Lucy, if we can just verify that you're there, then we'll be able to begin.
I am here.
Welcome. So with that, we now have a quorum. 7:03, we'll call the meeting to order so that we can continue on. So welcome. We have a couple of technically members of the public, if they would like to speak, or if anyone else would like to speak who's not currently showing up, you are welcome to as part of public engagement. Tom, Bob, anything you'd like to present as part of public engagement?
No.
Oh, all set, thank you.
Yeah, sound fine.
Okay, moving right along. First, we have the minutes. So minutes from the last meeting, these were sent by Ann Santos.
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, Alex is making a motion. We've got a couple more people who are joining. Excellent, welcome. And I'm not sure if Ann will be joining. She is unfortunately had some family things that she's been tending to. So we've got a motion to accept the minutes as presented by Alex. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
And was that Joe? Was that you?
Yes.
Okay, so Joseph has seconded it. With that, any comments? These are the minutes for July 18th. And has the requirements of members of attendance, when it started, when it ended, and the various things that we decided on it. Any comments on the minutes themselves? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes. We need to do this for better or worse by roll call. I'm just going to go down by the way that people have entered the meeting itself. So Alex.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Lisa.
Yes.
Lucy.
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
Eric. Eric has not joined audio yet. Eric, if you're able to send us a note by chat, you're welcome. There you are. Eric, we can't hear, your audio isn't yet connected, or you're on mute. In the lower left corner.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
There are two parts to the meeting, the minutes, what the committee does, and so on, and the recording of the changes to the bylaws. Is that being done by town council or by us in the minutes?
We didn't actually have any changes that were agreed upon. There were requests that the town council look into a couple of items. And so those items were referred to town council Mullen to examine, but where there hasn't been a substantive conversation by the committee, I don't see there being anything that's deficient in the minutes themselves, but it's certainly a valid issue. Tom, since this falls into your domain, your opinion on this is certainly welcome.
So I understand that there are certain changes we discussed and that the committee wants me to draft them in the form of a proposed article or articles for town meeting. I regret that I haven't done that yet, but I shall, and I certainly expect to have done so in advance of the next meeting.
Do you see any issues with the way that the minutes that they have to have much substance of those things that you're looking into?
No.
Okay. So the issue
Then I
to
approve
summarize
the
there.
minutes. Then I vote to approve the minutes.
Okay,
Because
so
we'll get a second bite if need be on any of these.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
If not more bites than that. With that, I also vote in the affirmative. With that, we have unanimous approval of the minutes themselves. Thank you very much. That takes care of item 3. So with that brings us over to item 4. We've got two chapters of significance tonight that we're going to be discussing, chapter 4 and chapter 5. Chapter 4 is appropriations. Chapter 4 doesn't have a whole lot of text to it. And for this, are people able to have it? I can go ahead and certainly do a screen share.
Should we do a screen share just in case there's someone in the public that wants to chime in, or I don't know? Making sense, makes sense.
And there we go. Actually, that's not what we want. Let me. Okay. With that, people, are you able to see my screen? I'm currently sharing
Yep.
browser. Excellent. Okay, I do ask, let me see if I can get a participants list up as well. There we go. That way, if anyone raises their hands, I'll be able to see that. Zoom becomes very challenging when doing screen sharing and meeting moderation all at the same time. So chapter 4, appropriations, the disposition of appropriations not expended. My understanding of this is that this is basically money that's not spent. Any portion of an appropriation remaining unexpended at the close of the year fiscal of the financial year shall revert to the town treasury, except those made for an uncompleted specific purpose. And the financial year runs from July 1st to June 30th of the following year. So when we talk about financial year, fiscal year for town government, that's what it runs. Keep in mind that is different than the national budget for the US government that runs from October 1st to September 30th. So there's a few months there where for federal funding, things can get overlapped a little bit. But anyone have any changes or proposals for this section?
So Dan, I just wanted to note that we don't elsewhere, I think, use the term financial year. Fiscal year is, much more common. And in fact, in the next chapter, chapter 5, section 5.2, we use fiscal year a couple of times. I don't really care. I just pointed out.
Is it worth putting into a possible omnibus type of things for language correction where it's non-substantive?
Yeah, I think so. Fiscal year is the term used in the statutes concerning municipal finance. The term financial year just kind of stuck in my craw when I read it.
So,
With-
Alex?
Wondering with that, could the date be put in for those in the community who don't necessarily know how the fiscal year goes, how it's like July 1?
Alex, it looks like we've lost your audio. We were hearing you, Alex, and then unfortunately it stopped.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
So I was saying I agree with Tom about putting fiscal year, but could it have what that means from like July 1 to like, June 30th for those in the community who may not know what the fiscal year is in terms of like the town?
Along those lines, would it make sense to change this from financial year to fiscal year as part of an omnibus type of of article and then maybe add the fiscal year definition to the definition section.
Okay.
And Tom, I'm asking you where you know the importance of the definition section. I'm just not sure whether that would be helpful, harmful, or have no impact.
So I have no problem with either putting in a parenthetical here to explain that fiscal year means July 1 to June 30, or putting the definition of fiscal year into the definition section. Either would be fine with me.
Other thoughts?
I think that sounds good.
So my personal preference would be to split it, to have the fiscal year definition separately, but also change it to be fiscal year. That way, everywhere fiscal year appears, someone could refer back to the definition section. And should there be a change to the fiscal year at some point, it only has to be changed in one place.
Yep, makes sense.
So with that, we'll refer that off to you, Tom, to build into some sort of article that will probably come out in about a year and a half or so. Alex, you've got that for the notes? Excellent. And without having to say a word, you've got the physical thumbs up, which works just as well as the thumbs up online. Any other comments on chapter 4? With that, moving along, chapter 5. Chapter 5 has 6 different sections, a little bit more text. So the revolving funds. Tom, do you want to do a quick explanation of what revolving funds are, the purpose of them?
Sure. In municipal finance, the annual town meeting in the spring appropriates money for the coming fiscal year, again, starting July 1. And unless that money is appropriated, the theory is you're not supposed to be able to spend it. And once it is appropriated, if it's just part of the annual budget, anything that's left over at the end of the year goes into the general fund for the next year's appropriation. And if it's a special appropriation, what's called an article, then it remains available until the need is that it's addressed to is completed. That explains what we did in chapter 4. Revolving funds are a little different. The idea of a revolving fund is we take money from some source that is a fee or a revenue that comes in because of something the town does. And we use that fee or revenue to support the very activity that generates the revenue. Think, for example, of if the town were to conduct a summer camp for kids by Lake Quannapowitt. Parents pay some kind of fee to the town, and the town just takes that money and uses it to fund whatever the camp costs are. You don't have to go through town meeting every year for an appropriation, and the money doesn't go into the general fund to be appropriated. To set up a revolving fund, there's a statute cited here, chapter 44, section 53E.5, which requires that we have a bylaw, and we do. This is the bylaw, and it requires that the bylaw set forth the information you see in the chart on the second page, 55D. And it requires that every year town meetings set a not to exceed amount that could be put into and taken out of that account.
Thank you. So with that, 5.1, the purpose. Any comments on the purpose for this particular bylaw?
I was wondering if, just for all, parts, changing the language that we had talked about in the definition section where it was, I think the specific one where if it said board, it would be changed to, like public body or body of, I can't find where I wrote it down. And then similar to what Tom had said in section chapter 4 about changing fiscal year, anywhere that we saw financial year.
You know, that's a good thought in general, but here we're dealing with, excuse me, a statute, again, it's section 53E1/2,
Mhm.
and we pretty much took that language right out of the statute. So it may be worthwhile just leaving this as is. And also, departments and agencies and officers wouldn't fall into the category of public bodies.
It was just where it said boards. If I found my notes from last time, if it said board, we said to have the language changed to public body, but committees, agencies, officers, all of that was set to stay.
Yeah.
At least from what I have written.
Yeah, if we were to do this, I think you might want to take out boards and committees and replace them with public bodies.
That seems consistent with the discussion we had at the July meeting and would allow for commissions and other types of public bodies to also have revolving fees.
Right?
And what comes to mind is the Conservation Commission as an example, which is technically a public body and it's a commission. It's not really a board or committee. It certainly meets the spirit of the wording, but then it would meet both the spirit and the language. And that I think that this falls through, including it into the following section.
Mhm.
I actually think it's in section 5.2, 5.4, 5.5. It's almost in every section except 5.6 and 5.3, I think. If I'm
Is it a problem to have language that is different from the Mass General laws that all of this is referring to, though?
Well, I may have spoken too quickly. I'm looking now at 53E1/2, and it refers to municipal agencies, boards, departments, or offices. So we didn't use, the statute doesn't use the term committees. And so I think if we want to be consistent and use public bodies throughout, I'm fine with that.
I would second that suggestion, again, being a part of an omnibus change. But there's exactly the type, some of the types of changes that as a public body ourselves that we've been tasked to try and makes the bylaws clearer and makes the intent easier for people to understand.
Mhm.
So that will affect both the plural and the singular for boards and committees. With that, we've got section 5.2 expenditure limitations. And just for information's sake, do we have a special article at town meeting that deals with this specific issue? Is this one of the $1 types of items?
We do, I think, and we certainly should have an annual article setting a maximum expenditure for each of the revolving funds. And my only concerns about this chapter are, first, that you see under 5.5D, there's a box for maximum expenditure. That changes every year. So I think we should probably delete that whole box and leave the rest of it as is. And the other concern I have is we have a slew of revolving funds, but only 2 are reflected here. That's because this is a relatively new bylaw adopted under a relatively new statute. And most of our revolving funds predate this bylaw. We might want to ask Steve Mayo to identify all of the existing revolving funds and supplement this 5.5D by naming them.
Do they need to be specifically named?
Yeah. You see the information in 5.5D, the name of the revolving fund, the purpose, the revenue source, and who's authorized to spend. Under the statute, you need all of that in your bylaw. And you don't need, however, the maximum expenditure, again, because that's not part of the bylaw. That changes every year with town meeting action.
Okay, so jumping ahead to this table, what I'm hearing is a suggestion to eliminate the column of maximum expenditure, and then to have the town administrator provide a list of all of the revolving funds to which this applies. Would this also apply to the school revolving funds as well? Those managed by the school department?
Okay, there are a bunch of statutes, many of them related to the school, that where one statute authorizes a particular revolving fund, and you don't need to set forth that kind of revolving fund in this bylaw. The bylaw basically allows a town to go beyond where those other statutes set up revolving funds, and allows the town to craft its own revolving funds, which we've done here. Most towns don't have a road repair revolving fund or a surplus equipment revolving fund. So actually what I'm suggesting is a fair amount of work, because we've got to figure out what are our revolving funds and which of them need to be approved under the bylaw because they're not a function of existing state law.
And that just thinking to how the school department in particular runs, most of theirs would probably actually fall under this bylaw as well. Thinking the revolving funds for many of the athletic pieces, their clubs, cafeteria is probably handled separately. There's specific school law on cafeterias, but the it may require a bit of coordination, but you're right. It sounds like it's somewhat significant, but also important for consistency as well.
Yeah.
So I'll take it as an action item to contact Steve Mayo to request that he start compiling that list. I will send that, and the fact that it's summer is a good thing, so he won't freak out too badly when he realizes how much work that is. And Tom, if I could ask you to just help figure out if we need to also contact Superintendent Lyons for the list of revolving funds there that may be covered under the statute, because I suspect that there are some. The school bus probably is separate. The school lunch is probably separate, but those that support athletics and some of the other revolving funds for class gifts, things like that, that are actually managed by the school probably do need to be listed. So I'll take on the initial contact list on that. Other thoughts on that,
I have a thought.
Eric?
Yeah, I remember 30 years ago, I debated town meeting. The director of recreation had some kind of thing that he got the money and he charged people for it. And after he met the expenses, if he still had some money left, should that money go back to the town? The finance committee guy said, yes, because otherwise you got a slush fund. And it seemed to me that you use the money for more recreation because we did not want to limit the amount of recreation, even though we come out with a little bit of money. So the Recreation Commission is another body that may have a revolving fund or may have one already in another name or should be added to the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That's good. That's a great example of the type of revolving fund that I suspect is specifically contemplated by this bylaw and should probably be listed, unless there's a separate statute for it. Other thoughts on the changes to this table that are being proposed?
So I'm sorry, I just have a quick question on that. So the expenditure piece, is that being removed? Are we looking at that to be removed?
Yep.
The
Okay.
column, the column of maximum expenditure.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, another question on that. I noticed that in the column for maximum expenditure, the most recent update was FY 2020. Is there place for, like, did it FY 20, or is there a provision in place for what happens if it hasn't been updated? It just reverts back to the last update.
Well, there may well have been a town meeting vote in 2021 authorizing a maximum expenditure, but because it didn't say, and we're amending the bylaw, nothing got printed here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Piggybacking on that, 5.6 also says fiscal year 2020, like the revolving fund part. And I had the same kind of question about if that has to change every year or not.
Oh, no, the statute requires that you state in your bylaw as of what fiscal year you begin these revolving funds. And so this looks like it came into being in late 2018. And so it couldn't be effective until the next fiscal year, which would be fiscal year 2020. Starting in July of 2019.
Excellent questions. Other questions on this table? Okay, let's go back just a little bit. Section 5.2, the expenditure limitations. We've already got the changes to board or committee to change that to public body. Any other changes on this? This does allow for town meeting action, and then that my reading is that town meeting action can later be increased by a vote of the town council and finance committee joint, effectively in separate votes. So an example of that could be a fund for, say, trash removal. And then there's a need to increase the cost of trash removal due to inflation or something. That amount could be increased after the town meeting approves it by the town council and finance committee, as long as they both vote in the affirmative for that. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes, and that comes right out of the statute.
Other feedback on 5.2? Moving to 5.3 on interest. If there's interest, I'm not talking about interest in the bylaw, but cash interest, that goes to the general fund. Any comments on 5.3? On 5.4, the procedures and reports. And this talks about where the reports are made and to make sure they are available.
So I have a question on this section. It says the town accountant shall include a statement on the collections, etc. And the report provides a department board committee made for its use. And this may be a question for Tom. If a citizen wants to look at this, the annual statement issued by the town accountant, are they given that right under some other statute? Or I'm just wondering, can any person see this statement where it just says the town accountant, must make a report to that particular board?
Yeah, that would be a public record. So anybody who wanted it would be entitled to a copy.
Other thoughts? Feedback on 5.4, recommended changes. Moving to 5.5, we've talked about D, we've got several changes in D, but let's start off with A. Talks about the table itself. First part, we will have through the omnibus section, the words board and committee would be replaced by public body. Any comments on A or B? Going on to C. And D. So one question that does come to mind as we look at these revolving funds, do funds that are created or managed by statute also need to be listed? And what comes to mind is there's effectively revolving funds. I think of the where there's either funds or specific expenditures, the cultural council or the Arts Council, as it's now known, has specific funds that are attributed to it, but those revolve from year to year because of the way that they're added to and expended. Does that require that to actually be accounted for independently of other monies? Is that what the statute, is that what C is really getting at? And part of the reason why I'm asking is because having seen some of the accounting reports, they're extremely hard and money seems to be commingled in some of the accounts from multiple sources.
Well, we should only list in this bylaw any revolving fund that is not created by some statute.
Okay. But for the purposes of discussion, things like road repair, that it should be its own separate account from an accounting perspective that's independent of anything other than what goes in and out of that account.
It's its own separate account. It's
Okay.
created by us uniquely. That's right.
So there may be an impact on the accounting department for this. Just
I have
given
another-
how their operations are.
I have a question.
Go for it, Eric.
We received money from the cable companies to go to WCAT for public access and local origination. Is that a revolving fund? There was before WCAT was formed in the 1980s, there was a fund that we received $15,000 a year from Warner, and that was spent by the town.
No, Eric, we don't want to go there. There's a separate statute that governs that.
Okay, right, now there is, I forgot, sorry.
Yeah. And in any event, that's not a town function. You know, this is only for a service that the town would provide. And if you take the money that's generated by that service and you plow it back into providing that service.
Okay. Other questions? That brings us to 5.6, the effective date. Seems like it's now effectively a moot point, but no reason to remove it because it shows when this started. Other thoughts? With that, brings us over to item 6 on our agenda, which is Chapter 190 zoning. You may have noticed in the preparation email that I sent, I did not put anything for this specifically. This was a follow-up to discussion we had at the end of last meeting, where I know there were some updates to state law. Bob, did you want to give a quick update as to what's happening with some of those concerns and when you recommend that we take those issues up with timing and so forth?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So Wakefield bylaw 190-70 is the zoning bylaw that deals with adoption and amendment. And in subsection E, echo, it says no zoning bylaw shall be adopted or changed except by 2/3 vote at town meeting. Now, 190-70 is based on Massachusetts General Law 40A Section 5. 40A Section 5 had two significant changes take place in both January and July of 2021. And most noteworthy, the change was a requirement that municipalities change their voting on zoning bylaws for certain categories from 2/3 to majority. And that was for multifamily housing, mixed-use development, accessory dwelling units, open space residential development, special permit, and TDR zoning. And they had an effective date of July 29th, 2021, so approximately a year ago. So it seems to me that one of the changes that needs to be made to 19070 is to have it comport with the change in the Massachusetts general law of changing those categories from a majority, from a 2/3 to a majority vote. In addition, there's been the recent change that you may have read about in the paper to Chapter 40A, Section 3A, which is multifamily zoning as of right in MBTA communities, of which we are one. And I don't know to what extent that may have an impact on our Chapter 190-70 as well. So I think that one of the things I will say, and I talked to Tom about this a few months ago, in 190-70I, which is the last section of that bylaw, the Wakefield bylaw, we do say all procedures not stated herein, but stated in Massachusetts General Law 40A shall be governed by the zoning act, that is Massachusetts General Law 40A, as may be amended from time to time. So although the language in 190-70 doesn't comport with the general law in changing the 2/3 vote to majority for those categories I described, from a legal standpoint, we're covered because we have that catch-all phrase at the bottom of I in 190-70-I. However, I do think it behooves us as a town to eventually update our bylaw to make sure it comports with the changes in the state statute. I'm not an expert on this stuff. It's just something I noticed when I was running for office. And I do think that when you get a zoning consultant, this is one of the things to put on the agenda to talk with the zoning consultant to see what changes, if any, he or she recommends that you all propose for the town.
Thank you, Bob. That was, it showed your background in legalese and understanding how these pieces work together. Alex.
I was wondering if you could bring up to share on your screen the section that Bob was talking about, the 190-70 from our stuff.
We've missed the first part of what you were saying, unfortunately.
Oh, I was wondering if on your share screen, if you could share the chapter that Bob is talking about with the zoning changes, just to be able to kind of see the language he's referring to.
It's 190-70. So scroll down to E, and you see E just has that one sentence about 2/3 vote. And once again, this section right here, all of 190-70 is pretty much based on Chapter 40A5 in Massachusetts general law. And it was accurate. E was accurate until those changes were made a year ago in the general laws. And the reason I say that we're covered right now until we make these changes, if you go down to the bottom and you see I, that's the section that shows that we, if this came up at a town meeting sometime soon, we know that we would apply the majority vote for those categories because we would follow the Massachusetts general law, because that's the one that takes precedent over our bylaw when there's a procedures not stated herein. And the majority vote is not stated herein because we still have the 2/3 vote up in E. So this is complicated stuff, and I do think that it needs to be looked at to see what changes, if any, should be made to our bylaw to make sure it comports with the changes to the Massachusetts General Law 40A5 that was done in 2021, and also be mindful of the new law of 40A3, Chapter 40A3A, the multifamily zoning as of right in MBTA communities, of which we're one of the designated MBTA communities. So these three pieces all kind of have to fit together to see what changes, if any, you all should propose making to 190-70. But time's not of the essence because we have section I that covers us. Am I wrong? Have I missed anything, Tom?
No, I think Bob brings up an excellent point, and I think it all illustrates the folly of trying to restate state law in a bylaw. Actually, I think most of what's in 19070 should just be eliminated. If, because we're just in, we don't have the power to change almost any of what's set forth here. So why state it? It's all set forth in chapter 40A anyway. We should simply follow the state law as it changes from time to time. But I agree that there's no urgency because of and we're going to be hiring a zoning codification expert who can address this whole matter.
Any other questions on that? Thank you, Bob. It's also a great segue into the next section, next item on the agenda, which is professional assistance with zoning recodification. So this is an example of the confusion for those of us who are lay people and not zoning experts and legal experts. Fortunately, we do have some on here who are. Looking at you, Tom, looking at you, Bob, to understand the legalese here. But to get professional assistance for recodification, we do have budget approval, and that was approved by the town meeting last April. And what is the process so that we can get someone or a firm in that can help with the zoning recodification, and someone who will be able to work with you, Tom, because ultimately you're going to have to defend changes that are made.
Sure. So Linfield, which I also represent, did this a few years ago. I believe they issued an RFP, though. Since you're hiring a lawyer to do this, you really don't have to go the RFP route. And they hired an excellent zoning specialist named Mark Bobrowski, whom I know from the Mass Municipal Law Association. And I've been in court with him in the past. He's excellent. And so he did a recodification of Linfield's zoning bylaws, which were in pretty bad shape, and he has put them into much, much better, more intelligible shape. But he's not the only person who does this kind of thing. So I think that the town council would probably, CIL would probably want to do some due diligence, maybe by issuing an RFP and seeing what interest there is from Bobrowski or people like him.
What is the process that we should go through to have that, to have the town council take up this issue so that we can get that assistance sooner rather than later?
So I think you probably just want to ask Steve Mayo to have the council address it.
Okay, Bob, as our liaison, is this something that we can task you to help explain to the counselors, your colleagues, as to what the intent here is?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll talk with them on it, but yeah, and get a hold of Steve, because I mentioned this to Steve today, and I think that is the right approach, is for the bylaw review committee to reach out to Steve initially, and I'll talk to the town council folks.
Okay. Thank you, because the sooner we can start engaging with whoever is selected for this purpose. And I think it's vital that they have a good working relationship with Tom, because he is the one who ultimately will be responsible for the outcomes of the town meeting to adopt the recodification. So anything that gets recodified, Tom has to defend. So having someone that he's able to communicate with easily becomes a priority, as I see it, for the selection process. And if there's a recommendation for members of this committee to be a part of any sort of selection process, we can certainly re-engage it at that time. But what I'm hearing is that that may not be necessary, especially if it's something that an RFP comes through and Tom's able to be a part of that.
Yeah, may I ask Tom a question?
Sure.
Your colleague, did he end up going to your Linfield town meetings and explaining a lot of the changes, or
He
did that
did.
fall on you as the town council?
Both. He did attend the town meeting, and it was very helpful to have him answer questions. But it was a long process. There were some mistakes made, and we corrected them in the following town meetings. He wasn't there for that, so I had that part of the job.
Thank you.
Questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, so with that, I've got as the tasks that I have to take on this, I will be contacting Steve Mayo for lists related to the revolving funds on chapter 5, section 5D. Also asked Kevin Gill if he has any feedback on this as well, since he's the town accountant. Also asked Steve Mayo and town council to address an RFP to help with professional assistance and do that in coordination with town council Mullen. Trying to manage town council with town council gets very confusing on the language perspective, especially verbally. But that's a council issue. And then Tom has on the to-do list the language and for a future warrant article, particularly on the table, as well as the language as it relates to the change of boards and committees to public bodies and the change in section 4 for fiscal year and the associated change into the definitions. Am I missing anything for tasks? Last task that I have is Alex will send out the minutes at the conclusion of the meeting once they are drafted in draft form, and we will vote on those at the next meeting. Next meeting I have, according to my calendar, would be September 19th. While we could have a meeting before that, I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. Well, we could have a meeting on the 5th. That's actually Labor Day. That would push us over to the 6th. We're trying to keep things on Mondays. So I think at this point, with the amount of to-dos and for those who have school and other activities starting, probably best to go with the 3rd Monday in September, which is September 19th. Other people have thoughts, preferences? I'm fairly flexible. If we wanted to try and have a meeting instead of on September 5th, we could push it off to the 6th. I'm not sure of availability of Tom and Bob, but just wanted to throw that out there.
I'm fine with that. Dan, do we know what's on the agenda as of what we're going to be talking about at that meeting, or do you come up with that within the next 4 weeks and put it on the agenda?
I will come up with my suggestions for it. Will likely just be chapter 9.
Okay.
Chapter 9 is boards, committees, and commissions. It's 27 sections. So it's a fairly meaty section. It's really on self-governance is what chapter 9 is about. A lot of that was actually added at the prior bylaw review committee meeting. So that's what I expect to be the topic of discussion for the next meeting. We may not complete chapter 9 in one meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
I'd have one other suggestion for you, Dan.
Sure.
This just goes back to our experience of being on the committee before. If you're going to address 9 at your next meeting, a lot of the guys in town are players in those. A lot of them might want to reach out to them and say, hey, do you have suggested changes Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Commission on Disability Issues, Finance Committee, or Permanent Building Committee, just to see if they have any kind of proposed changes for the bylaw review committee.
Absolutely. I'll actually request another thing from town council, from town administrator Mayo, is to actually contact all of the heads of boards because there's self-governance.
Yeah,
It actually would affect all of the public bodies.
that's right.
There are some that are specifically named, but every public body gets affected by chapter 9. And it would be a good way to help publicize the fact that chapter 9 is there for those who have not familiarized with it previously. Education is always a good thing of legal stuff.
I have a question.
Yes, Eric.
I think there should be more bodies added to that list. Is this the time to do it, or should I just write a letter to you and town council about my thoughts on this, and let you think about it, be prepared for the next meeting?
I'd recommend that you write the letter and send it. If it will then get, it'll then ultimately get circulated to the members as appropriate. We'll determine what's going on. The expectation that I'm setting is that I will be contacting every board, committee, commission, every public body in town should get a copy of the request for comments. So if you have specific suggestions for language and so forth, you're welcome to send it to me as chair, and then I will send it on to Tom just for preparation, and any sort of language recommendations will go out to the members without opinion prior to the meeting itself.
So I can write a letter to you and Mr. Mullen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Although I'll just tell you, for educational purposes, my recollection is the reason some of those are delineated in chapter 9 is because they're created under state law, or they're created under the town charter. So the ones that are specifically listed in 9 by name, like conservation and others, you'll either find governance under Massachusetts general law and or under the Wakefield town charter. So I think that's the reason historically they've always been listed by themselves in chapter 9. And that's why you don't see a lot of the other ones listed. So yeah, it's certainly good for discussion, but I'm just giving you a little bit of history as to why some of those appear in the town bylaws.
If I may respond or add to it.
I didn't want to open up a lot of discussion. I was just letting you know the background on it. But
At the very end of the E code, there are 2 references by state law. And I think one refers to the Department of Public Works, and the other works to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which are not described in the bylaws. But that's a question for next time. That's why.
We can discuss that at the next meeting. And if you want to send the questions in advance, then we can certainly have any research that needs to be done by Town Council Mullen. He'll have the ability to do that in advance of the meeting. So that's my recommendation on how to handle that. The feedback is certainly welcome. With that, anything further? Alex?
So for the next meeting date, I would be inclined to not do it on September 6th, just because it's the night before the first day of school, and trying to get kids ready and organized for that day. I would prefer if we did the 19th, but whatever everybody wants, I'll go with. I was just throwing that out there for any other fellow parents on here.
I think it's also primary day. Is that true?
I believe it is. My recommendation is that we have it on September 19th without objection. Okay, so that's what we will plan for. With that, do we have anyone want to take first dibs at a motion to adjourn? Or we can stay in this meeting for forever. I know we enjoy
I
it.
move to adjourn.
Okay, Joe, I believe that was you.
I second.
And then Alex is seconding. Okay, with that, we have to do a roll call vote for the adjournment itself. So Alex,
Yay.
Joseph,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Catherine,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Tim.
Yes, I already, yep.
Okay,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
and I vote in the affirmative. Did I miss anyone? With that, at 8:04, meeting is adjourned, 1 hour and 1 minute. Well done. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate all of your assistance. We will see you again in just about 1 month on September 19th.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
I-
You.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.